I want to play, there's a really great 6-minute exchange between RFK and Senator John Cornyn that I think is worth kind of pointing out here. I'm sorry, Senator Michael Bennet. That's kind of worth, I think, watching and responding to. And then we'll also pull up one more clip that he did. But I wanted to have your expertise kind of walk us through some of this stuff, because RFK says very crazy things, but I'm not a health expert. So go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll get rolling.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Malaty Rivera. I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist, which means I track emerging outbreaks and how they affect populations. I've been doing this for about 15 years. I'm also a science communicator. I feel like I take a lot of pride in that second title, because one of the things that I'm most passionate about is translating complex scientific concepts for a wide audience to understand them without shame, without judgment, to make informed choices for their health.
Perfect, because I was homeschooled, so we need people like you to help me. All right, I have to do one more magic button thing. Okay, boom, that worked. Does this work? I hope it really works. Yes, it works. Okay, so Jessica, here's the rules for how we do this, okay? I'm going to start playing this video, and anytime you want to interrupt, just say, pause, we'll pause, and we'll kind of get into it. There's a lot of things that I want to point out in this video as well, and I think that's just really worth highlighting, because I do think, and I spent time at America Fest recently. The Make America Healthy Again motif is really popular there. And I don't want to discount everything that they're saying. I agree, like, sugars in food isn't good for you, etc. So I like how this senator does this line of questioning. I think it's worth pointing out. And then we'll get into more of the crazy things that RFK is talking about. So, all right, friends, here we go.
I think that, Mr. Chairman, we are truly through the looking glass this morning here in the U.S. Senate, and this committee is being asked to fulfill a really important responsibility, which is to decide whether to confirm Mr. Kennedy to one of the most important health care jobs in America. And the reason I think it's so important is for many of the reasons you said in your opening statement, which is that we live in the richest country in the world, and we have some of the worst health outcomes of any industrialized country in the world. We live in the richest country in the world, and we have some of the lowest life expectancy rates of anybody in the industrialized world.
Okay, let's pause for a second. I just want to say I agree with that. That's my understanding. Jessica, what's your thoughts on just that opening? That, yeah, we spend the most on healthcare per capita. We don't have the best outcomes. Do you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. And I think anybody who's trying to paint a rosy picture of healthcare in America does not understand healthcare in America. Our healthcare system is broken. It's unjust. It is not equitable, and we're seeing disproportionate outcomes for people in poorer communities. People of color oftentimes have 2 to 3x worse outcomes. I mean, COVID is a perfect example of that, a tragic example of that. So yes, he is saying a lot of true things, and I think that this is where RFK can endear himself to folks who recognize the real problems, and then it gets really messy after that.
Cool. Yeah, I totally agree. We've been saying on the show for a while that, like, we spend so much money on healthcare, our outcomes are not good, our life expectancy is not good, something is wrong. And I think there are some people who are more in good faith who might disagree on how to fix it, but I think we all agree now, even MAGA agrees with us finally, that our healthcare system is not working as intended. Okay, we'll keep going.
I was a school superintendent before I was in this job, Mr. Chairman, and I can tell you that Mr. Kennedy's right, that when I look at the kids in the Denver public schools, if we don't change the way we eat in this country, 40% of them are going to suffer adult diabetes as a result of their diet. And we're, as I said, spending more than any other country in the world, and our families, every single person's constituents in this Senate are facing chronic shortages when it comes to health care. My friend from Texas, Senator Cornyn, has been a champion on mental health care. We have an epidemic, as he knows, across this country in mental health care, partly because of what the massive social media platforms that were sitting behind the President of the United States have inflicted on our children for their profit in the last decade or so. So we have no shortage of challenges to confront, and I even agree with some of the diagnosis of Mr. Kennedy. What is so disturbing to me is that out of 330 million Americans, we're being asked to put somebody in this job who has spent 50 years of his life not honoring the tradition that he talked about at the beginning of this conversation. But
let me pause right here. A couple of things I want to point out, and Jessica, would love your thoughts. Number one, I do have to laugh at the whole meritocracy, right, mantra. Like, we need to have a meritocratic, whatever the word is. Meritocracy has to be back in the White House. RFK has no health qualifications, right, I think, for this role at all. And could you also explain to me, I don't know, what is the role of the health secretary? Like how much power would someone like RFK actually have over our health system if he was to be confirmed?
It's a massive role, and the responsibilities have a very far reach. So you're talking about a person who's going to be advising the president on everything from healthcare policy, things related to public health policy. He's going to be overseeing agencies like the FDA, the CDC, and also CMS. And CMS is for the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So you're talking millions of people who depend on these programs for their healthcare coverage. HHS is also responsible for responding to emergencies when we declare states of emergency. COVID is a perfect example of that. They are also in charge of a lot of grant making and also stockpiles of everything from vaccines to PPE to equipment for health emergencies. I mean, it is a massive, massive role that requires a lot of understanding of this space.
And do you think that, I mean, you're someone in this space, do you think RFK has like any actual qualifications to be justified in having this position? Because again, like, I keep thinking about often like all this talk from people like Charlie Kirk, meritocracy, but then I see the results of their meritocracy and it's like, well, RFK bent the knee and kissed the ring and now he has this role, but there's no medical qualifications that he has. And as we're going to see in a few minutes, he says some really freaking dangerous shit. Like we have to call it what it is. Like it's bullcrap, right? It's not founded in science, it's pseudoscience, etc. Last thing I'll say on this part for me, I do really want to highlight that all the things that Senator Bennett said, many people, including liberals, have been arguing for a long time. I mean, I was 18 when I watched Food Inc. Okay, I was still a conservative, and I'm like, wow, like, I didn't know that so much of our food was rearranged corn syrup, right? I remember Michelle Obama's Healthy Kids Initiative. I remember how talk radio mocked her relentlessly for that. I remember how talk radio would say, it's not the government's decision to decide what you eat, personal responsibility. And now they've all shifted to, you know how toxic our food is? We should regulate that. And I'm like, I would agree with you on this, but where were you like a decade ago when Democrats were trying to get this stuff done? Do you kind of see it the same way, or do you have a different perspective?
No, I mean, I also want to recognize the fact that, like, I'm not saying that a medical person needs to be in this position either, because we've had previous HHS secretaries who were not medical professionals, right? The previous one was not a medical professional. But there is something to say about understanding of the issue, proximity to the issues that we need to recognize, right? We're talking about somebody who, even during the hearings, continued to invoke the scope of the EPA and the USDA. Because let's think about his tenure. His tenure is, this guy used to have a really, really loud platform on environmental science. Yep. And if he had stayed in that lane in environmental advocacy and environmental law, perhaps he wouldn't have devolved in this way. But he looked at an opportunity to really become the savior of moms who were screaming about vaccine injury. And it just led him on this really, really slippery slope to what he is now, which is now the poster child for the anti-vaccine movement.
Yeah, fair. All right, let's keep it going. Let's see where this conversation goes.
Peddling in half-truths. Peddling in false statements, peddling in theories that, create doubt about whether or not things that we know are safe are unsafe. Not that every vaccine in America is unsafe, not that you can't possibly have an adverse reaction, but that parents and children in my old school district and school districts all over this country would be better off not getting vaccinated than getting vaccinated. Unlike his own children who were vaccinated, unlike the people he invited to his house in Los Angeles for their party who were vaccinated. For everybody else, it's about peddling these half-truths. And he says it with such conviction that you want to believe him. And Mr. Kennedy, I just have there are many, many things in the record, but I hope that you could answer these questions, yes or no. I've tried to ask these in a manner that's faithful to what you actually said, because I didn't want to have a debate about whether you actually said them. So I'm asking you yes or no, Mr. Kennedy.
Pause.
Did you say that
COVID-19... hold on. Pause.
I really love the fact that he mentioned this whole saying it with conviction, because that is a communications tactic of this movement, right? You say anything that sounds like science, that's science-y, that has some statistics in it, and you say it with conviction, you say it with emotion, and it grips people. It gets people's attention, and then they repeat it, even if it's bunk. Right. And so there have been so many times. I mean, he is a very compelling, and somebody, I can't remember who, called him an influencer. He is an influencer. He influences people very easily because of his name, because of his credentials, because of his prominence. And so when he says sentences that are absolutely made up statistics, I mean, the one statistic that comes to mind is 15% of children are on SSRIs. Absolutely not true. It's like 5%. But you say it emphatically, you say it with, gusto and with rage out of what seems to be altruism, where you want to have better situations happening. And people just believe it. And nobody's fact checking except for us in the background screaming, like, where is he coming up with these stats?
Right. And that's really because in the broader MAGA movement, facts don't really matter. As Matthew Taylor says, in fascism and authoritarianism, truth is subservient to power. Right. So whatever's going to be used for power can be talked about, but whatever isn't in that favor will not be talked about. And so I think this is a good example of that, right? And we're going to see, this is where the exchange gets really fascinating, because Senator Bennett is just going to quote him, and I have the receipts if we want to watch those videos too. I pulled some of them, and then RFK is going to try and get out of it, but he did say these things. So let's hear what he says here.
So I'm asking you yes or no, Mr. Kennedy. Did you say that COVID-19 was a genetically engineered bioweapon that targets black and white people, but spared Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people?
I didn't say it was deliberately targeted. I just quoted an NIH-funded and NIH published study.
Did you say that it?
Okay, you're shaking your head there a lot, Jessica. So I'll give you the floor. What's your response to that?
No, he did say that. I remember him saying that, and there was no NIH, and this is where it really makes me mad. It's almost like name dropping, when somebody wants to be serious, and so they'll say like, "Oh, I know somebody with this type of title."
Yes.
When they use phrases like NIH study or evidence-based or science-backed, they're doing it to validate something that is probably pseudoscience. Right. And there are a lot of things that can be on the NIH website that are not NIH studies, right? And so this is a perfect example of them saying, and that's exactly the clip. That's when he said it. He is just spewing misinformation that he's heard that has somebody who could have, registered it on the NIH website, but it's not an NIH subsidized study, right? Not to mention the fact that this actually falls in line with a lot of his racist beliefs about health, right? He went on to say Blacks and natives multiple times, and then on top of that used that to justify different vaccine schedules. I mean, it was just really, really awful, and it just is pretty on brand.
Yeah, friends, I want to say welcome to the stream. We are live with April Ajoy, of course, my wonderful co-host, and Jessica Malaty Rivera, someone helping us out, really an expert in the field of epidemiology and other health-related things, helping us navigate what the heck RFK is talking about. If you're new here, please make sure you give this stream a like. If you're new to the show, give this channel a like. We do all kinds of videos like this, helping you feel hopefully a little more sane in a world of propaganda. I do want to play this clip because I like people knowing that we have receipts, right? Like, I'm not just parroting whatever someone's saying. Like, here's what he actually said. It's a 1.5-minute clip. I'm going to play the whole thing so you can hear him. Here's what RFK said. You be the judge. Here we go.
Bioweapons. I know a lot now about bioweapons because I've been doing a book on it for the past 2.5 years. And the technology that we now have to develop these microbes, we've put hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there's an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are because of the structure of the genetic structure, genetic differentials among different races of the receptors, of the ACE2 receptor. COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. But we don't know whether it was deliberately targeted that or not. But there are papers out there that show the racial and ethnic differential and impact to that. We do know that the Chinese are spending hundreds of millions of dollars developing ethnic bioweapons, and we are developing ethnic bioweapons. That's what all those labs in the Ukraine are about. They're collecting Russian DNA, they're collecting Chinese DNA, so that we can target people by race.
There you go. There you go. A little hard to hear, but yeah, go ahead.
It's wild because, again, you mix in a little bit of science with some pseudoscience, and people don't know how to distinguish between the two. ACE2 receptor is the cell receptor in human cells that binds to SARS-CoV-2 virus. It's how the virus attaches itself to a cell and infects the cell, right? That's not false. But he is false in extrapolating that there are different expressions of ACE2 receptors among ethnicities, but that has not been proven to say that the outcomes of COVID are worse with some ethnicities, or that it was somehow manipulated and manufactured or turned into a bioweapon to target that. There's no, this kind of is adjacent to the lab leak theory, which has also been disproven. Early in the pandemic, in January 2020, we had the entire genomic sequence of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. And because of that, you can see that it has natural origins just by looking at that. I mean, when things are manipulated, you can find them. You can find those manipulations, right? And there isn't any evidence of that. And so this goes back to, again, the racist and xenophobic tropes about a disease coming from China and a disease affecting some people and not others, and also the fear-mongering of bioterrorism. Bioterrorism and bioweaponry is a very real threat, but it is not what happened in SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19.
Yeah, and that's really important to point out. And I also need to say that, don't forget, friends, a person who just said that, which I think even 5 years ago will be almost like Alex Jones level conspiracy, is now being interviewed for a major role in our federal government. Let's keep this questionnaire going because it only gets worse. And they're like, no, he was just... Oh, that's not me. That's where that came from.
Targets black and white people, but spared Ashkenazi Jews.
I quoted a study, Your Honor. I quoted an NIH study that showed that
I'll take that as a yes. I have to move on, I have to move on. Did you say that Lyme disease is highly likely a materially engineered bioweapon? I made sure I put in the highly likely. Did you say Lyme disease is a highly likely militarily engineered bioweapon?
I probably did say that.
Did you say that?
And that's what the developer of Lyme
I want
disease
all of our colleagues to hear it, Mr. Kennedy. I want them to hear it. You said yes. Did you say that exposure to pesticides causes children to become transgender?
No, I never said that.
Okay, I have the record that I'll give to the chairman, and he can make his judgment about what you said. Did you write in your book, and it's undeniable, that African AIDS is an entirely different disease from Western AIDS? Yes or no, Mr. Kennedy?
I'm not sure if I made that.
Okay, I'll give it to the chairman, Mr. Kennedy. And my final question, did you say on a podcast, and I quote, I wouldn't leave abortion, to the states. My belief is we should leave it to the woman. We shouldn't have the government involved, even if it's full term. Did you say that, Mr. Kennedy?
Senator, I believe that every abortion is a tragedy.
Did you say it, Mr. Kennedy? This matters. It doesn't matter what you come here and say that isn't true, that's not reflective of what you really believe, that you haven't said over decade after decade after decade, because unlike other jobs we're confirming around this place, this is a job where it is life and death. for the kids that I used to work for in the Denver public schools, and for families all over this country that are suffering from living in the richest country of the world that can't deliver basic health care and basic mental health care to them. It's too important for the games that you're playing, Mr. Kennedy. And I hope my colleagues will say to the president, I have no influence over him. I hope my colleagues will say to the president, out of 330 million Americans, we can do better than this.
Thank you. We need to move on.
I mean, he's totally right here. I mean, 100%.
Absolutely.
By the way, I do have the clip just for the sake of maybe proving it. I have subtitles for this clip too. Here's what he said about Lyme's disease. I actually found the clip and I pulled it. So I'll play this briefly. I'll give you the floor, Jessica. Here's what he said.
And with other symptoms of Lyme disease, including one who has early dementia, that I suspect is connected, but there's no way of knowing. But young people who are even younger than me, but all the guys who are my age have problems from it. And it's real. I remarked to somebody the other day that it's really ruined going into the woods on the East Coast. I grew up in the woods, and it's now dangerous to go in the woods. You're taking a risk that we never had to take when we were kids. And that it's another thing that keeps us from enjoying the outdoors and keeps us locked inside. And the idea that this may have been is highly likely to have been a military weapon. And we cannot say 100% for sure, but we do know that they were experimenting with ticks there, and that the ticks, as you show, are a epidemic because of what happened in Plum Island and the other labs. Deer ticks and other species of ticks, Lone Star ticks, or whatever. We also know they were experimenting with diseases of the kind of like Lyme disease at that lab and putting them in ticks and then infecting people, testing them with bird vectors, etc. And I've just published a book called Wuhan Cover-Up, which is a very, very comprehensive history of the bioweapons program in this country.
There you go. So I want to play the whole thing in context, but he absolutely did say that. And I think it's important to highlight that, that this is who RFK is. He says this stuff with conviction, with so little proof, or to your point, Jessica, half truths, that are maybe there's some part that could be true, but it's twisted into a whole different perspective that isn't true. Does that make sense?
And it's based on a lie. The Plum Island Animal Disease Center, PIADC, did not research Lyme disease. They weren't doing gain of function research with ticks and Lyme disease back then. But again, if you say it and it sounds convincing, people will just believe you. I mean, it's also just kind of absurd to not understand the goal of bioterrorism here, right? Bioterrorism intended to have mass casualties, right? Weaponizing ticks that are very specifically located, that have long feeding times, that are kind of logistically challenging for it to actually embed itself in somebody's skin, enough people, and it doesn't have a high mortality rate either, right? That's not the goal of bioterrorism. Bioterrorism is mass casualty, mass harm. So it's just an absurd way, again, to misrepresent the facts, villainize research, and make it seem more sinister than it is. I mean, he's part of a number of folks who are very anti-gain of function without understanding what gain of function even is. And that's a separate conversation.
Well, can you just tell us, though, because I hear that term a lot. Can you give us just like the crash course? What does gain of function even mean? Because I hear it all the time and I'm like, it's just over my head, but it's thrown around all the time. What is it?
Okay, gain of function is a type of virological research that it's trying to understand exactly how diseases affect and infect people. And in that research, you can essentially try to replicate that process and see if there are ways in which, if the virus changed, would it be worse or would it be better? Would it be more curable? Would it be uncurable? And these it's scenario essentially planning with how do we prepare, including create therapeutics and vaccines in the event that this virus mutates in such a way. But people think it's like Frankenstein science and we're creating things that will just eventually become completely out of control and explode and leak out of viruses. And that's just not what's happening. there
Okay.
are experts
helpful.
in this space who I can refer you to who can really kind of explain to you too that it's not some dark Frankenstein lab.
Well, it's just helpful to have some kind of reference, right? Because again, we hear these terms and you're like, well, what are we actually talking about? It's not my expertise. So, I'm happy to have you kind of give a quick crash course. I do want to play one more video for you while you have a few more minutes of RFK in the hearing. And this one really got me. I mean, I was like, are we for real right now? Is this where we are in society? So let me grab this clip real quick while I do this. Let's see. I think I have it. Okay, it's here. So this is the one I wanted to pull too. He claims that I guess black people need fewer vaccines than white people, which I'm just like perplexed on. So let's hear this on the question. It's pretty short, about 43 seconds. And I'll get your response.
So what different vaccines?
I think it's playing. Hold on one sec. Let me see here. Okay, we should be good to go. Can you hear this?
I should have received. What different vaccine schedule should I have received?
I mean, the pollen article suggests that blacks need fewer antigens.
This is so
So
dangerous.
you get the same measles vaccine.
Mr. Kennedy, with all due respect, that is so dangerous. Your voice would be a voice that parents would listen to. That is so dangerous. I will be voting against your nomination because your views are dangerous to our state and to our country.
I mean, do you think science is dangerous, Senator?
Okay.
Publish peer-reviewed studies.
That's his claim, right? Published. Oh, hold on. I've been muted for a second. Say it one more time, Jessica. Go ahead.
It makes my skin crawl because it is so overtly racist and it's so overtly ignorant and proof that he doesn't know how to read clinical data, right? Nobody is denying the fact that immune responses can vary by race, sex, age. Those things can vary. But to extrapolate that and say that because immune responses can vary, and we're not talking about massive variations, we're talking about like it standardizes over these charts. But to talk about them having different schedules twists the data far beyond what any type of very close study of varying immune responses might be. He is taking it to an extremely dangerous racist space that goes back to eugenics.
Mm-hmm. And it's dangerous because it talks about too, like how like black women, they used like old textbooks used to talk about how like black people didn't experience pain, and so they didn't need pain medication.
Yes.
And it's so you're right. It's so dangerous that this in 2025 we could be having a health secretary that's taking us down that path again.
Well, and
for him to dig his heels in this too, he's digging his heels and saying you don't believe science is science. No, you don't know how to interpret scientific data is the problem.
Jeez. I mean, it is. I'm not even sure what to say sometimes. When I hear this stuff, like, just one more piece of evidence of like just how disingenuous this guy is, and then we'll let you go, Jessica. I appreciate you making time for a few minutes. You're kind of last minute. I think I texted you last night, like, hey, can you hop on? Mm-hmm. This is actually very important, right? So here's what he said about vaccines. He's trying to walk back his long legacy of being very anti-vax. He said that there is no safe vaccine. You shared, Jessica, what was the clip you shared of him working? Where was he working with a government to kind of convince them that the measles vaccine was not helpful, which caused a huge measles?
Samoa. Yes,
thank you.
Samoa. He very much backtracked on the Samoa issue. And for folks who don't know, there was an awful outbreak of measles after what was a terrible tragedy. 2 children were given a vaccine that was incorrectly mixed with a muscle relaxant. Those 2 children died. As a result, they suspended the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination campaign to see what had happened. Now, mind you, the prime minister at the time was vaccine hesitant because he had a grandson with autism. After folks kind of came in, realized that it was actually human error, not the vaccine, they wanted a massive campaign to vaccinate children. What he did was see an opportunity to go there. He lies about it. He went there. He met with the prime minister, met with one of the most prominent anti-vaccine campaign leaders who said it was a pivotal moment for the movement, then wrote a letter several months after the vaccination campaign saying, it could have been vaccine derived. It could have been a vaccine issue. And 83 children died of measles because of this outbreak.
Wow.
So when we say things like there's blood on his hands, we're not being hyperbolic. We're talking about a person who has been opportunistic from the get about his campaign, about getting people to believe him and his pseudoscience, and he's backtracking it. I mean, he so deeply wants to be not anti-vax as the label because he thinks the label is the problem, but his whole platform is on undermining vaccine confidence.
Yes. Let me play this kind of before and after about vaccines. I'll get your final take on why vaccines are so important, and then I'll let you go. Here we go.
I believe that that vaccines play a critical role in healthcare. All of my kids are vaccinated.
Okay, I want to pause that. So he says all of my kids are vaccinated, okay, to the Senate. Here's what he actually said, though. This is from The Daily Show, June 1st, 2020. Here's what he actually said, though, about his kids being vaccinated. Listen to this.
If I could go back in time and I could avoid giving my children the vaccines that I gave them, I would do anything for that. I would pay anything to be able to do that.
Think about that. What he actually says was that if he had a time machine, he would go back in time to not give his kids vaccines. So when he says that his kids are vaccinated, he fact-checked true. What he doesn't tell you is that he deeply regrets vaccinating them.
Tim, to this day, he has been known to be, if he's walking on the street and he sees a baby, he'll tell the person carrying that baby, hope you're not vaccinating that child. He has done that multiple times.
Wow.
So this is not it's politics to a T, right? You just talk out of both sides of your mouth. You give these vague answers. You give answers that can seem like, possible course correction. I mean, when he said that he was supportive of vaccines, that was intentional. I don't think he was trying to actually say that he's pro-vaccine. He was trying to assuage the folks who defend him and also believe that he's anti-vax, because anti-vax is a pejorative term to them.
Right. Well, before I let you go, I'm going to give you the final word. Talk to me about vaccines. I mean, we've seen a lot of anti-vax rhetoric. I heard it at Turning Point America Fest. The COVID jab is bad. Vaccines are really not good. There's no accountability for these big pharma companies who are just, pushing vaccines on kids. We have more vaccines than ever. The schedule is crazier than ever. I know that there's a lot to respond to, and I'm sure I'll have you back on the show to go more in depth. But I know that you hear this stuff. You and I did a video on it a few months ago, did over 1 million views responding to it. Give me your take, your expert take here on, are vaccines actually really, really good for us? Are they actually dangerous? Is there no accountability? What's your general spiel? Is that the right word? I can't talk this morning. April, what's the word? What's your response?
Your general take?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that one. What's your general take on that kind of rhetoric?
Yeah. I want to say this, and I want to explain to folks too that I have no financial interest in vaccines. I have never been paid by a pharmaceutical company or a vaccine manufacturer to say any of the words that I'm about to say. I am saying this as a public health scientist who has studied vaccines and vaccine preventable diseases for 20 years. The reason why we have an older lifespan directly related to vaccine science. The two greatest achievements in public health have been clean water and vaccines. In the last 50 years, 154 million lives have been saved because of vaccines. Vaccines are not perfect, though. And I will say this, and anybody who lies to you and say that there's no risk is really dangerous. There's risk in everything, including in vaccines. But when we say that vaccine benefits outweigh the risk, we say that emphatically with and mountains of data. The outcomes from vaccine injury are rare. Bad outcomes from vaccine injury are rare. They're not zero, but they're rare. And oftentimes, if there are bad outcomes, many of them can resolve. Whereas that cannot always be the case with diseases, especially vaccine preventable diseases. We're talking about children who needlessly died, people who had 8, 9, 10 children as a ratio, as a bet almost, to see how many could actually survive, because there were so many vaccine preventable diseases that were not vaccine preventable at the time that were just killing children in mass. And I think that we're on a very, very dangerous point in history right now, where we're losing a generation that was touched by some of those diseases that we don't see anymore. The vaccines are almost a victim of their own success, because when public health works, it's invisible. Yeah. When vaccines work, diseases don't happen. And the last generation, our parents' generation, which was the last generation touched by polio, is getting older, and some of them are dying. And the amnesia of polio will hurt us, because when we don't see it, we think it's not a threat. And the fact that people are re-litigating the value of a polio vaccine means that we are about to see potentially disability and death for no reason.
Jessica,
are you worried about, can I ask a quick question?
Of course, it's your show too.
No, I know. Are you worried about not just vaccine schedules, but like the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, at this point, you have people trying to make vaccine schedules a la carte, kind of choose your own adventure, when the vaccine schedule has been specifically designed to address risk based on exposure, based on susceptible age. You know, Tim and I did a collaboration on Instagram to talk about misunderstanding of the vaccine schedule tripling. No, it hasn't tripled. Yes, the number of injections may have increased, but we're talking about 97% fewer antigens in the vaccines compared to what we got 20, 30, 40 years ago to protect us from twice as many diseases. So vaccines are more efficient, they're more effective, and you're talking about people playing with fire. There's no need for this type of risk. And we know that the risk is there because we have the data of morbidity and mortality among children. And that's really what's so sad is you've got a generation of folks who are screaming about being pro-life. Yeah. And this is the most pro-death thing I've ever seen in my life.
Wow. Strong language. Really strong. Well, I mean, Jessica, I really appreciate you making time. I know that you're on the West Coast, so it's even earlier for you. Where can folks find your work if they want to follow you online? You have a great public platform.
Thank you. I'm on Instagram at Jessica Malaty Rivera, where I post as often as I am capable of on science. And I will say here, probably first time publicly, I am starting a Substack soon because I feel like that is necessary. I mean, I've been pushing it off
Let's
for 4
go.
years. But
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think it's safe to say, Jessica, that we need science communicators and really influencer type of people who know how to work social media, who are also experts in this, to really help us combat so much misinformation that we see right now, largely coming from these right-wing media ecosystems that are pouring a lot of money into narratives that support ideas and outcomes that are really going to hurt a lot of people based on propaganda. So I want to just say I love your work. It's been great to keep in touch with you over the years. I'm sure we're going to have you back on the show, especially if RFK gets confirmed. I mean, Lord, I hope not. But if he does, we'll have a lot to talk about. So let's keep in touch, and thanks for your time. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to see more of our content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the work that we do, you can donate at the link below. We are a 501c3 nonprofit and make all of this content completely paywall free. Thanks so much.